Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, my guest this week first joined us well over a year ago, actually. Alex Kaschuta is a columnist and the host of the Subversive podcast, one of the most popular political podcasts. She's joining us again from Romania. Thank you very much for coming on, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me on again, Peter. Lovely to be here.
When we spoke, I believe that childbirth was imminent, was it not?
Yes, exactly.
How's it going? How are things going?
It's going wonderfully, I have to say. Not just because I've built it up, obviously, with my whole traditionalist spiel. It is indeed a wonderful experience. I mean, the childbirth itself, take it or leave it, but the actual parenting is great. My son is a wonderful character. He's got a completely foreign personality already. Yeah, it's just delightful. It's been a privilege to be able to be here with him as well. And yeah, to have the support of my family. It's been wonderful, I have to say.
Oh, lovely. Well, many congratulations anyway.
Thank you.
Belated, I'm afraid. When we spoke last time, we talked a little bit about how the waves of woke were sort of lapping at the shores in Romania. And I wanted to ask you basically what's happened since. Are you sort of still basically managing to hold things off, or has this infiltrated society there?
It has. I mean, things are progressing maybe a bit slower than in the west of Europe, but it's essentially the operating system of the high status culture that we're all feeding off of from the internet. So people here still watch Netflix. They get informed by the same 5 news agencies that provide information for everyone around the world. It all trickles down here. Maybe there's a little bit of a translation barrier, but people know where the sun is shining from, and it's from the West. And the people who are educated, the most educated in our countries, have been educated in the West. So they bring all of this software with them, and it really is essentially coming from the social media platforms as well. That's a very important propagation medium for these ideas. So yes, there's not really any inbuilt immunity. I know a lot of people in the West expect there to be some sort of kind of traditional core here, and there is probably more of that than in the Western countries, but it's still comparatively just very small. There's a family coalition. There have been marches, kind of like a March for Life type thing, but it's very small, and it's not extremely powerful.
All right. So basically, it's coming sort of via West media, social media. But I mean, we've just done a documentary, for example, at the New Culture Forum on kind of woke indoctrination in schools. Now, obviously you've got a son now. Is that something that would worry you there or not?
Oh, of course. It does worry me because these education standards, I mean, they used to be quite antiquated. We used to make fun of the fact that, my generation was still studying from communist manuals, and we were, calculating the record crop yield and things like that because people didn't have money to buy new materials. Now there are new materials, and there are new materials every year. And we're
Right.
constantly in this churning reform for education. Everything changes every year. The standards for every type of test, admittance to high school, to college, it all changes all the time. So there's a clear pipeline also from the EU for these standards, because Romania, to be very honest, at the moment when we got into the EU, didn't actually comply with the so-called Maastricht criteria. We didn't really weren't supposed to be into the EU, but we were accepted on multiple conditions, and a lot of those conditions tied into very stringent regulations and the acceptance of a lot of standards, both in terms of trade barriers, both in terms of how we structure regulation, things that just didn't exist. and also a lot of the diversity and inclusion, and essentially the standards that we see in the West. So all of these things were Romania is very much intertwined with politics in Brussels. So whatever
Yeah.
is the standard there is very shortly coming down the pipe to be implemented here as well. So I would surprise me that by the time my son is of school age, we would be in line with many of these things from the West.
So basically, it's true to say that people in Romania get a lot of coverage of the West in terms of what's happening with woke ideology and woke infiltration. That is covered. They're very aware of it, are they, in Romania?
I mean, they are aware of it, in the sense of this is what's on TV. So in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
they're aware of it in the sense that they either bought into it or they are just vaguely aware of it, and just understand that this is how a right thinking person thinks. This is
Right,
kind of
right.
the right side of history. The moral arc bends towards justice. All of these things, and the direction of justice is very clear, and it is towards ever more autonomy, towards ever more degrees of freedom for every individual to customize their experience as they see fit, especially in terms of sexual expression, gender expression, and all of these things. So it's even though it doesn't necessarily have to be explicit, but as you know, probably it is it is implicit in all sorts of media, of movies, of shows, of music, of artists' presentation at awards shows, on Instagram, everywhere. Um, People get their culture, so-called culture. This is kind of the high status type of thinking that is on display, and people take
Yeah.
notice of that. They just like subtly,
Uh,
start taking notice of that. I've seen people here say, okay, I'm not going to be gendering my child, or I'm going to, raise my child gender neutral. And I mean, this is, the sticks in Romania. There's just, this stuff should be, cutting edge, but it isn't anymore. I mean, this is, you know, the mommy trends travel very fast here, and it's a bit worrying, to be honest.
and I mean, that I am surprised at that actually. It shows how much I know. But what kind of parents are we talking about? I mean, you say that they are high, basically high status.
Yes, I think there's not really like a very pronounced like upper class here. So this would be like middle class people who speak English very well. I mean, English is the ultimate propagation medium for this type of stuff. If you're not
Yeah.
an English speaker, you're pretty much immune to this, because the internet in Romanian is a completely different beast. It's very hard for this stuff to translate that easily. But if you're an English speaker, and if you're in any way interested in modern culture, then you will probably be tending in that direction. Especially as a young woman, I feel like young women are kind of especially prone to these mind viruses.
Right. Um, when we actually last met, and you probably might not remember, but it was a conference in Hungary, actually in Budapest, given by the Danube Institute. And what sort of strikes me about being in Hungary is that it's relatively liberating in the sense that there's not this neurotic air when it comes to woke issues, when it comes to free speech. It feels, so for someone coming from Britain, it feels very very free. I know that you lived in Britain for quite some time, didn't you? And I think that recently did you not describe it as being kind of an atmosphere of, now was it anarcho-tyranny that you talked about? Can you explain that a bit?
Yes, I think it's hard for people who have grown up in Britain and have lived in Britain their whole lives to understand one aspect of the culture shock that you get when you move from a place, second world place like Eastern Europe, to a first world place like England, London in my case, and to notice the fact that what I noticed was that there was de facto almost no police force. There were
Yeah.
almost no ways of actually enforcing, um, any sort of protection against violent crime. The police force was there to record crimes once they happened. They provided maybe useful statistics. They participated in the Notting Hill Carnival. There were interesting graphics on social media. I heard that they would pursue people for, TV licenses and saying bad words on Instagram. But in actual reality, knowing a lot of people who had been victims of violent crimes, just the kind of had like a little homeowners WhatsApp group around the place where I used to live in East London. And I admit, East London is essentially a little bit more edgy than some other places in London. I know there might be some safer places, but that was just close to where I was working, so that's where I lived. And it was just every day there was stabbing of teenagers two blocks over. There was muggings on the towpath on the Lee River. There was just the nighttime was a very tricky time. You just wanted to go as fast as you could on your bicycle. Go in. The door to our apartment complex looked like it was the door to a bomb shelter. It was clear that people, like, every night you could hear them ramming things into the door, trying to get into the building. Who are you going to call? What are you going to do? And it's a strange feeling of, okay, there is no protection for the average citizen here. Like, they don't care about me. Maybe they care about me in my capacity as a citizen or as a woman or whatever in some different context, but not necessarily about my physical protection, especially against more organized groups of people who might be of a different ethnicity or things like that. So it was a very strange place to be. And that's the thing. Like, I come from a much poorer place in Europe, and we really don't have these problems. Like, it really. And then you hear about things like Rotherham, and I mean, I understand. Eastern Europe's record on sexual violence and trafficking is not good. I'm not going to say this, but the systemic nature, the silence, and also the fact that this is the UK. People do have a certain standard of how how these things should be treated in a so-called cradle of civilization, as it undoubtedly is really shocking, especially from coming from the outside. I really did come to the UK in respect for the opportunities that were there for someone like me, in respect of the culture that I could find there, and it really was sad to see people just treating their country as a glorified airport lounge, like just economic zone where it was just a free-for-all, and all we can do is just I don't know, prey on the relics of this former empire, because whatever you take from it, it deserves, because it's it's a criminal empire, and it's all built on slavery and blood money and all this type of stuff. Because I feel like that was the explanation I got given every time I said, okay, don't the people of the UK have any sort of right? Don't they have any sort of power to decide over their own destiny? The indigenous ancestral people of the UK, no, that did not compute to anyone. It was all about atoning for colonialism forever. So
well, no, I mean, obviously over the past 2 or 3 years this is hugely intensified. I would say that you being in London, London is not Britain, London's not England, and so those kind of attitudes as well would be, I think, far more prevalent actually. But when you talk about the police, that rings obviously extremely familiar to me. And what we have at the moment, you say that doesn't appear to be any protection. More than that, really, Alex, what we've got at the moment is what seems to be a total ineffectual police force. So, for example, I don't know if you've seen anything on the media, but we have at the moment these eco warriors, just stop oil people, gluing themselves, vandalizing beautiful works of art, clogging up the King's Highway, as we now should call it. I wonder, what would the attitude be of Romanian police if that were happening on Romanian streets? Because people are at their wits' end with our own police.
I think it would be much more swiftly dealt with
Yeah.
in more, I guess, in a more classical manner, as you'd expect from the police. I think, like I said, though we're trending in that direction as well, and they might, be then involved in lawsuits here as well. Things are going in that direction. But yes, at this moment, I think we could probably expect the police to physically remove these people and put them in custody for a while, a day or two, then call their parents and have them taken home. No extreme acts of violence, no tear gas,
Yeah.
but taking them
Yeah.
into a van and taking them to the police station would definitely be part of it. So yeah, that's the attitude. But it's also understandable in a way that young people gravitate towards these these complexes because they offer kind of the only utopian, the only almost like religious vision that we have, and that's left for anyone. It's this save the world, save the earth, get involved. There's also this idea, kind of this dream of the autonomous individual affecting world change. This is essentially one of the other messages that's always coming in through the media. It's like, okay, there's this one courageous individual who, through their own autonomous decision, changes the world for the better. And that's essentially the hero mythology that all these children have been imprinted with. It's like, okay, I'm going to go to, I know, Sainsbury's and pour out some milk, and this one act of courage where I stick it to my parents is going to change the world. I'm going to stick super glue to a Van Gogh. It's going to change the world. I understand why they have these ideas. I remember, vaguely having some similar ideas myself, that some, act of authentic inspiration, putting it out into the world, is going to change the world. Yeah, I don't think personally that's how it works. But like I said, I'm not surprised that they think this.
I mentioned there anarchic tyranny, or a mixture. You've described the anarchy side of it, but the tyranny, presumably, this is how I feel, comes from the increasing sense of the police actually policing what you think and what you write. And even though we're meant to have had some changes there, basically cases come up virtually every week where the police are, going to people's houses, or, chasing them online for things that they've maybe written or said. And this seems to be sort of out of control now. And, it really is a case that the police have become a thought police, actually, in a way.
Yes, you described the police before as ineffective, but in a way, in the spirit of the current regime, they are doing exactly as intended, because they're policing its enemies and protecting its clients. That's just the way it is. And from our perspective, given the idea that, okay, this is, we have the rule of law, and, looking historically, okay, what was the purpose of the state? What was the kind of the social contract? It does look like narco-tyranny. But from just like a cool perspective, from the aliens' perspective, it's like, okay, what are the values of the regime? It's this, there are protected classes, they are oppressed. For example, criminality is a result of social problems. And for example, if you punish a criminal, you're just compounding their oppression. So why would you punish the criminals? What is actually a criminal is the criminal thought that leads to the oppression from the oppressive groups. Like if a white lady has a strange thought that she puts on Twitter on a strange afternoon, an oppressive thought that victimizes people and leads to maybe their criminal action. You want to stop it at the source. So if you look at the kind of the structure, the philosophy behind the current regime, it all makes sense. The police isn't there to protect you. It's there to provide protection to the client classes of the regime, which you're not in. I'm sorry, Peter.
That is a considerable change from the traditional role of the police in Britain. I think it accounts for the fact that traditionally there was always a very, very good public relationship with the police. Actually, the police sort of arose out of ordinary people. That was the point. It was policing by consent. It's sort of gone. I want to ask you something, but moving on a little, Alex, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're hearing something here about something called the new right. And first of all, would you first of all say that you're part of that movement? And if you are, could you explain, well, what are the features of the new right as opposed to what has gone before?
Yes, it's a ragtag group of different factions that I would say I'm part of. At least I'm conversing with all of these factions. Some of them are, you know, a little, they're in tension because they have different worldviews. I think the overarching idea of the new right is a distancing from the kind of let's say normal conservatism as it has been. You know, the day-to-day business of conservatism, as we have seen, the extremely unable to conservatism of the last 50 to 100, depending on faction, even 1,000 years. So
Yeah.
essentially what the new right has realized, and like I said, these are completely different. Like, for example, there are traditional Catholics, part of the new right. There are people in subgroups called neo-reaction that have, you know, kind of ascribed to Italian elite theory, like, you know, Machiavelli and Pareto, and there's all sorts of different subfactions. But the kind of the overarching principles are that they've realized that there is no value neutral space, because for the longest time, the old conservatism, that the thing that we're distancing ourselves from, has argued for the recreation or the creation of a value neutral space where, you know, the society should be value neutral. This is essentially kind of the fusionist idea where, you know, you have a free market and, you know, people can do whatever they want in the social realm. The government does not get involved in the social realm, and there are no restrictions necessarily. But, you know, we're kind of libertarian on the economy, and then you also can get to do what you want in your own space. The new right realizes not that this isn't this is a bad idea, but that it is an impossible idea. There has never been a value neutral space, and that trying to create one, especially in opposition to a foe that is extremely value laden, that has an extremely virulent, powerful moral vision, is a doomed endeavor. And that
Yeah.
is why the right, the old right, keeps losing every time. I mean, the current conservatives are trying to conserve the liberalism of 5 minutes ago. You know, no, thank you. This
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
losing endeavor. Like, on what principles, on what timeless, essential ideas are you basing your opposition to these things? The fact that you're uncomfortable with the new levels of progress, that doesn't mean anything. And the liberals are right on that. You know, they have a moral vision. Their moral vision is onwards and upwards to till the dissolution of man. And the new right says no, up
Yes.
to here,
Yes.
and opposes to that eternal principles. Like I said, you know, like Catholic integralism. You know, like it, don't like it. The idea is that you know, there is a transcendent, stable, fixed framework that we peg our civilization on, and that's it. There is little wiggle room, but it's not in the essentials. So it's not a moral system in flux. There is, you know, we've got one book, and that's good enough for us. Obviously, like I said, this is not the only perspective, but every one of these value systems has one thing in common: is that there is a fixed point, which offers that stability, and it sees in that stability a value in itself.
So do I take it from that that the structure and the that you mentioned is a strongly religious one?
Most people in these spaces are religious. They are Protestants, some of them, like I said,
Yeah.
Catholics, traditional Catholics, important. Jewish. I mean, Yoram Hazony is essentially the kind of the ringleader of national conservatism. He's, you know, Orthodox Jew. Most, like I said, most people are religious. There's even a pagan element in these spaces, kind of like the Nietzschean vitalist pagan faction. Essentially, what all of these have in common is the fact that they draw back onto kind of these timeless principles. So they don't necessarily have to be tied into one specific religious tradition, but they do have to be tied into, you know, principles like I don't know, a respect for nature, you know, hierarchy, things like that, that are essentially tied to the right. And that's why a lot of people in this space essentially call themselves right wing rather than conservative, because
Right.
it feels a bit like a losing game to keep trying to conserve things.
Yes.
And the right wing essentially just represents, okay, these are timeless principles. What are they? How are we going to be a bit more concrete about this stuff? And yeah, how are we going to create this? But this is still very much in its in the phase where we just throw things against a wall and see what sticks. It's a hard project to pin down, just because once you pin it down, you already start to cleave off factions, because everyone wants to, have their own project be the central one. So it's a bit
Yeah.
like herding cats, unfortunately.
Yes.
So
Is it mostly a? Is it mostly a? How can? Is it a young movement? I mean, and is it largely an academic one, or what?
There are younger and older fact, like for example, the traditional Catholics. They are of every age. Like the kind of the thinkers, the top thinkers in this space would be more of I don't know, in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're professors at Ivy League institutions. But the pagan vitalism very much more skews more younger, so up to like 40. So there's different factions, and I think those kind of have their own kind of youth imprint or older. But yeah, there's a wide spectrum of ages involved in these spaces.
Are there any existing politicians? Isn't first of all, I'm right in saying it's based largely in America at the moment.
Yes, there are some. There are, I don't know, fellow travelers, friendlies in Europe as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of actual political actors that have come up, I mean, in the U.S. you have Blake Masters, who is like
Mm.
loosely aligned with these ideas. You have J.D. Vance, who's loosely aligned with these ideas. Ron DeSantis as well.
Mm.
Greg Abbott a little bit. There are a few people who, I mean, I don't think they've come out and said I'm aligned. I pledge allegiance to the new right, because it's, like I said, very amorphous space. But they I think obviously feed off of the energy and the ideas and the kind of the ferment that comes out of the space.
Yes. Where does Donald Trump, President Trump, fit into that, or doesn't he?
Oh, he does. He does. That's kind of splits the group down the middle. There are very very pro Trump factions, and some people who think that Donald Trump kind of wasted his shot, his chance, that he could have exerted much more power than he did, and that he kind of used this his chance at the presidency as kind of a vanity project, and he didn't really accomplish much. I mean, I can see truth in both of these ideas. He definitely was an immense pattern interrupter, and he really did change so much in the space. And I think he actually was one of the seeds for the fact that now I have a
Yeah.
podcast. I can invite people. They've moved beyond Trump, but he also could have done much more with his mandate, and I don't think people are wrong to say
Mm.
that.
Mm. Would it be true, therefore, to say that, because you mentioned there about conservatives in the traditional sense having really not conserved any ground, right, for a long time, would you say then that this is basically going on the offensive rather than constantly being on the defensive? Is that how you characterize this movement?
Yes, and it's also just, yeah, having a strategy that works. It doesn't necessarily have to be offensive, but even just putting your foot down and not moving with the tide is a form of offense at this
Mm.
point. Um,
Mm.
and I think one important aspect that kind of unites the new right and is a big departure from the old right is our focus on. Not necessarily on capitalism, but on this kind of so-called techno capital. So you have kind of
Yeah.
technology and capital as almost a force, a mind of its own, that is really almost the essence of anti-traditionalism. Like, it is a
Mm.
tide that has its own devices, its own intentions. And a lot of the fallout that we see, the destruction of traditional communities, the kind of dissolving of boundaries between people, a lot of this stuff is not necessarily downstream from ideology. It's not like someone came in and said, okay, like feminism as well. It's not like the suffragettes changed the world. I know we like to think that, but a lot of this stuff is downstream from technological changes, from
Yeah.
historical changes, that pushed women into the workforce, allowed for all of this dissolution of traditional guardrails, and essentially just made it easy. For example, for people, they used to live in multi-generational households, which had a lot of good aspects to them. But at the same time, it's also a revealed preference that people would like to have their own apartments, and
Mm.
the free market essentially
Mm.
allowed that. But with that, essentially, what you have is a dissolution of thousands of micro interactions, of institutions, of who takes care of grandma. Now this is a whole industry. There are whole, and this is essentially, there wasn't some person coming into the town square and saying, no, from now on we have single homeism. No, this is a revealed preference of the individual. We really want to have our own apartment, we want to have our own space. And this is just one thing that's downstream from technology. And I think what the new right sees is that this is an extremely important component of looking at what we should be conserving, because it's not very clear to me that you can just pull one ideological lever, or change the tax rate, and you'd have you're back into conservative utopia. It's really a complicated thing, and looking at that complexity and piecing that out, I think that's a big thing that people are looking at now.
So, if people want to find out more about the new right, I know it's just an unofficial term, isn't it? But obviously, they should listen maybe to your podcast, right?
I agree. People should listen to my podcast.
I see it's got a reputation as being a bit of a linchpin, actually, of it now. And that's subversive. It's called Subversive,
Yes,
isn't it?
it's called Subversive.
And just by way of ending, do you think there's anything else that they could do? Is there any book they could write or read, or people that you would also suggest they listen to?
Yes, I think there is an essay by Curtis Yarvin, which is kind of one of the high priests of the new right, called Principles of the Deep Right. This is kind of his term that he's come up with. I think that lays it out very well. There's an essay in Compact recently by Josh Hammer that kind of describes the new right. That'd be interesting. I don't think there are any books as of yet about the new right, this phenomenon I'm explaining. I know there's a Michael Malice book called The New Right, but it's not exactly overlapping with the people that I'm talking about. So, yeah, these two essays I think would be a nice primer for anyone who's interested. And these podcasts.
And listen to your show.
Of
yes.
course, of course.
Alex, thank you so much. It's very, very good to speak to you again, and I hope we revisit maybe next year. I'm sure we would have been through about 5 prime ministers by then, but I will look forward to speaking to you. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. That's it for So What You're Saying Is This Week. We shall see you next time. Thank you. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.